Hey, welcome back for Division 1, Chapter 6, Being in Time. And this is Care as the Being of Dasein. And basically what we're doing here, this is the last chapter of Division 1. So Heidegger's wrapping up everything. He's kind of, this is the climax of the first part of Being in Time, Division 1. So what we've done up until now has been to outline a kind of structural whole to the being of Dasein. And that structural whole is, Heidegger says, it's the average everydayness of Dasein can thus be determined as entangled, disclosed, thrown, projecting, being in the world, which is concerned with its ownmost potentiality in its being together with the world and in being with others. So that's quite a mouthful, and I thought I'd just run through that very quickly and break it down a little bit. The average everydayness of Dasein. So that's the phenomenological approach that Heidegger took in Being in Time is to analyze Dasein as it is in its ordinary, everyday interactions and its ordinary, everyday existence. So that's the average everydayness of Dasein, can thus be determined as entangled, disclosed. So entangled is that we talked about how Dasein is caught up in everydayness, in its entanglement with the they, and all of those fallen modes, curiosity, ambiguity, idle talk, those three things we talked about. So that's the entangled part. Disclosed refers back to interpretation, which is built on understanding and attunement. So entangled, disclosed. Thrown, projecting. Thrown, I didn't really emphasize this too much, I think, but thrown is the word Heidegger uses to talk about how Dasein we kind of find ourselves thrust into a world that we had no part in making. We're kind of a world full of norms and customs and rituals that we didn't create, but we find ourselves in the midst of anyway. So that's that idea of being thrown. Projecting refers back to what we looked at in understanding, where everything is all of the things that we encounter in the world and the way that we encounter the world is based on a kind of forward thinking approach to projecting ourselves into our goals and our aspirations, that kind of thing. So thrown, projecting, being in the world, which is concerned with its ownmost potentiality. Again, the way Dasein's concerned with its own being and its own potential for being, and its being together with the world. The world refers back to worldliness, that all of the things we discussed there, inner worldly beings, objectively present, that kind of thing, chapter 3. And in being with others, and that's chapter 4, where we looked at concern or solicitude, which was the way Dasein finds itself in the midst of not just objectively present things, objectively present beings, but with also other beings like itself, like Dasein. And that's kind of the breakdown of that whole sentence, which is the structural whole we have of Dasein so far. But now he wants to grasp this structural whole in its totality. And that's what this chapter is basically about. So it's divided into four, or I'm dividing it into four: anxiety, care, and then we'll look at reality and truth. So, all hopefully within 40 minutes, maybe. Let's see how we go. Anxiety first. So anxiety is a specific kind of attunement which is associated with falling prey. It's opposed to fear, because the distinction between fear and anxiety is that fear is always about a specific object, something in the world, an inner worldly being, whereas anxiety doesn't have that kind of direct or specific focus. It's not directed at something in particular. Anxiety is not, though this is the way Heidegger explains it, anxiety is not based on that referential totality because it's not concerned about something in the world. And not being concerned about something in the world means that it's not directed at anything in that referential totality. And since it's not directed at anything in that referential totality, it lacks relevance and significance, both of which we saw come out of that the worldliness of the world, that referential totality. So relevance, remember, was the way an objectively present being kind of relates to the final end, or the final goal, if you like, the end of that chain of significance, which ended with an ultimate an end for a Dasein. And so that was relevance. And significance is that relational character that each of those references has between different objectively present beings. So because it's not based on that referential totality, and therefore it lacks relevance and significance, anxiety, in anxiety, nothing has meaning. There is no meaning in anxiety. Anxiety kind of robs the world of meaning. It kind of reveals, if you like, a world without meaning, because it's directed not at anything in the world. So there are two ways to think about anxiety: what anxiety is about and what anxiety is for. So anxiety is about being in the world as such, and therefore discloses the world as world. So it's not about anything in particular in the world, it's about the world as such. It's about that totality. It's about all of those things. And therefore it's not about any one particular thing of them, any one particular thing in the world. So it therefore discloses the world, as this totality, as this complete thing. That's what it's about, but it's also for something. But in thinking about what anxiety is for, Heidegger says, since everything lacks significance, lacks relevance, lacks meaning, then it can't be anxiety for a definite possibility. Because it's not for anything definite. It's this kind of, it's a more abstract, although I hesitate to use that word, but abstract kind of sense of unease, if you like. So anxiety strips away the possibility of Dasein's understanding itself in the mode of falling prey, and throws Dasein back upon its authentic potentiality for being in the world. And that's basically just trying to capture that idea that so let me finish the thought. Anxiety then is for its own most potentiality for being in the world. Dasein's own most potentiality for being in the world. Again, because it's not for anything particular, any particular definite possibility. So it's, what is it for? What are we anxious for when we're in anxiety? We're anxious for our own most potentiality for being in the world. We're anxious for our own. Dasein is anxious for its own potentialities, not as a specific possibility, this possibility or that possibility, but as possibility in general. But still that Dasein's possibility, but not. So I don't mean possibility in general as in any Dasein's possibility, but possibility in general for that Dasein, if that makes sense. So we've got two things there. Anxiety is about being in the world as such, and it's for Dasein's own most potentiality for being in the world. Both of which are just ways of looking at this mood, this attunement of anxiety, as something which is not directed at something specific in the world or a definite possibility in the world. So it's concerned with being in the world itself. And in this last part, anxiety being for one's own most potentiality for being in the world, it is individualizing. And Heidegger calls this existential solipsism, which obviously has nothing to do with with solipsism as the self being the only real thing in the world. All he means is that it's anxiety is it kind of directs one towards oneself, directs a Dasein towards that Dasein's own most potentiality. So in this sense, anxiety is kind of the ticket out of the entangled, tranquilized dwelling with in the mode of everyday publicness of the they, and it discloses being in the existential mode of not being at home. And this Heidegger calls uncanniness. And that's an important concept to grasp, uncanniness. So anxiety gets us to this feeling of uncanniness. So what is uncanniness? Let me break that down a little bit more. We originally saw that being in, we originally called it a dwelling with, a kind of familiarity with. And we saw being in as that everyday publicness. That was the original way we understood being in, through that average everydayness of Dasein. And we called that being at home. But what anxiety does then is pull Dasein out of that average everydayness, that publicness of the they, and it individualizes it as being in the world, where being in becomes not being at home, but a not being at home. It has that sense of unease about it, because it's, again, remember, it's concerned with this, it's concerned with being in the world itself. So it kind of gets to the root of everything and creates this feeling of unease, this feeling of uncanniness. And it's kind of a, I guess if you've ever had any kind of, an existential kind of sense of unease, or something maybe not quite just not quite clicking, not quite right. That's, I think, what Heidegger's angling at here. It's kind of a subtle feeling that pervades, but it doesn't direct. It's not because of any particular thing, but it underlies all things, and it's that feeling which is anxiety or uncanniness, and which leads to uncanniness. So the idea here then is that this everyday analysis of anxiety reveals phenomenally that our familiar or our familiar dwelling with that sense of being in the world, that familiar being in the world is actually a mode of uncanniness, not the other way around. And that's what we originally kind of thought. The base was that familiar sense of being in the world, as in being at home. But we've now, through this analysis of anxiety, found that anxiety actually belongs to Dasein's essential constitution. It's a core part of Dasein's being. It's an existential in Heidegger's language, and so it's not built on this prior mode of everyday average everydayness, which we originally analyzed being at. Which we originally analyzed being in the world as. Rather, this uncanniness underlies that. It's a deeper notion. It goes below that, and it belongs to Dasein's being itself, the being of Dasein. Therefore, not being at home or uncanniness must be conceived existentially and ontologically as the more primordial phenomenon. So it's because it's a part of Dasein, as it's a part of Dasein's being, then it goes below this this familiar kind of dwelling with that we analysed being in as originally. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense. It made sense when I wrote it anyway. So I'm going to just roll on to the being of Dasein as care, and this is kind of the crescendo, really, I guess, if you like, of Division 1. So anxiety has revealed three characteristics of the being of Dasein. The first is existentiality, and this is that Dasein is a being which is concerned in its being about that being. And that's pretty much everything we just talked about with anxiety. So this is concerned about has been shown through understanding to be a self-projecting of Dasein into its possibilities. Ontologically, this potentiality for being means that Dasein is always already ahead of itself in its being. It's worth probably just thinking about that for a minute, because what it means is that Heidegger says we're always already ahead of ourselves in our being, and what he means is we're always projecting. It's not just we don't exist and then we kind of strive for the future, and then we form goals and try and accomplish them. Rather, that projecting into the future it's deeper than that. It's a part of our very being, our very essence, if I was to use that word. So we're always already ahead of ourselves. We're always projecting into the future. And that's going to be a crucial aspect of Heidegger's philosophy. So the second part of the being of Dasein is facticity. And this comes about because being in the world has been shown to have the constitution of thrownness, meaning that Dasein is always already in the world and subsumed in a referential totality of significance, anchored in a for the sake of which. In short, existing is always factical. And if you've read any Sartre, facticity will be probably fairly familiar to you. Basically, facticity is since, as I just said, since Dasein is always already in a world, there is no situation, there can't be a situation where Dasein exists outside of a world. Dasein is always in a world. And for that to be true, Dasein is always a particular Dasein. There's always an ontic characteristic to Dasein, an ontic quality, an ontic mode of existence for Dasein. A definite, particular, specific aspect to its existence. So Dasein always exists with a certain physical body, in a certain time, in a certain geographic location. So these are all things that make up facticity. And that this is unavoidable. This is just a part of what it means to exist as a human being. And the third part, the third characteristic of the being of Dasein is falling prey. And this refers to the way that as soon as Dasein finds itself as a thrown potentiality for being, those first two characteristics, it is always already absorbed in the world in entanglement. So we saw Dasein is always in that inauthentic mode of what can I say? Average everydayness, entangled with the they, the world of the they, falling prey through those the things we talked about a couple of videos ago. Curiosity, idle talk, ambiguity, that kind of absorption in that inauthentic mode. And so that is this, again, an unavoidable aspect to Dasein. It's just a part of the being of Dasein. So those are the three characteristics of the being of Dasein: existentiality, facticity, and falling prey. And Heidegger summarizes this by saying the formal existential totality of the ontological structural whole of Dasein is being ahead of oneself, already in the world, as being together with inner worldly beings encountered. And Heidegger calls this totality care. And that is the being of Dasein. Care, summed up in a single sentence, which is nice. And I'll just quickly run through that sentence again, because it's the centerpiece, really, I guess, if you like, of Division 1. Being ahead of oneself, that's what we talked about, existentiality of Dasein, always projecting forward. Being ahead of oneself, already in. So that's being in. That includes facticity and the way that Dasein is the way that Dasein exists, the being in aspect of Dasein. So already in the world as being together with, and that captures that element of Dasein, which is together with not just with other inner-worldly beings, so things like things that are objectively present, but also other Daseins. And that kind of summarizes this whole division, first division. But we're not finished there, because Heidegger also talks about reality and truth in this chapter. So I'm going to go straight into that now at 25 minutes. Let's see how we go. Reality. Well, previously, reality, the word reality, has been confounded with the problem of the external world. Does the external world exist? That is, that's the state of affairs that Heidegger's coming into. So access to this external world was seen as coming through cognition. But for Heidegger, cognition is a founded mode of the being of Dasein. So it's not cognition is not fundamental. It's built on something else. It's built on this being of Dasein as care. So that's the original, that's our starting point. That's the foundation, care, not cognition. And Heidegger disputes that idea that it's through cognition that we access, or that we have access to the external world. And specifically, the real. So the real is accessible only based on being in the world. That's kind of where we're getting at here, which is care, which we saw was being ahead of oneself, already being in a world, as being together with inner-worldly beings. And the problem of the external world is, for Heidegger, does the external world exist? How can I know? Right, that's kind of the question. If all I have access to are my perceptions, how do I know that there's actually anything out there corresponding to them? Or how do I know that my perceptions accurately reflect what's really out there? And for Heidegger, this isn't even a problem, because Dasein is being in the world. So think about that for a second. The external world is not a problem, because Dasein is being in the world. The world is essentially disclosed with the being of Dasein. Really, this is nothing more than, it's just a consequence of everything we've talked about so far. There is no world without Dasein. And that's also breaking a little bit from this original, from the beginning of this section where Heidegger says reality's been confounded with the problem of the external world. That's not what reality is. Not the external world. Reality is, it's bound together with Dasein, because there is no reality without Dasein's being in the world. If you take away that, then there's nothing that it could even make sense to call reality, or the world. The world, I mean, it loses all meaning. It loses all relevance if we take away Dasein from that picture, from that equation. So the world is essentially disclosed with the being of Dasein. There's no problem here. Is there an external world, or do we accurately perceive it? None of that matters, because the world is disclosed with Dasein. It's bound together with Dasein in such a way that the two cannot be separated. They're so tightly interwoven. It's basically just saying there are two components to the world. There's you need an external kind of, you need matter, but you also need a subject. You also need a being like Dasein. Because without either of those, without one of those, you have nothing. So the problem of the external world kind of disappears for Heidegger. And he talks about Kant's scandal of philosophy. Kant's scandal of philosophy was that up until his time, the proof of the existence of, or proof of the external world had still not been given. He called that the scandal of philosophy. We hadn't yet been able to prove the external world was real and it was the way we saw it. So Heidegger calls Kant's scandal of philosophy and human reason in general. Well, he said that this scandal, the scandals, let me start again. He says that Kant's scandal of philosophy does not consist in the fact that this proof of the external world is still lacking up to now, but in the fact that such proofs are expected and attempted again and again. For Heidegger, they're completely redundant. They're unnecessary. The search for a proof will always fail because it presupposes an inadequate ontological starting point, i.e. it presupposes a worldless subject. It presupposes an agent who can exist without a world and then observe or look at that world as it really is. And there is no such thing. The subject always comes with the world, and the world is disclosed through that subject. So that's kind of Heidegger's take on that. I thought of an analogy for this too, about the way that people have tried to kind of overcome this perceived limitation where we don't know if the external world is really there, or is it just, or whether we perceive it the way that it really is. And it's kind of like a person who is completely blind without their glasses, wanting visual proof that his glasses exist. Right, so he has the glasses, he can see when he's got them on, but when he's wearing his glasses, he can't see them, right? He's seeing through them. So he takes them off to verify that they're there, that they're real. But once he takes them off, he can't see anything because he needs his glasses to see. And that's kind of the position that Heidegger sees philosophy as being in when it's trying to prove the external world. We don't need to prove it because the fact that we are living in it guarantees its existence. So there are a couple of things there. Realism, he talks about realism. Realism is the idea that there is the idea that the matter or the world is independent of human consciousness. This is correct in the sense that the external world is objectively present in some way. It is, matter is real, but it's wrong. Realism's wrong because it looks for a proof of that matter. It tries to derive some kind of proof that that matter is real. And idealism, the opposite, the idea that the world is completely dependent on human consciousness, is right, it's correct in the sense that it emphasizes the fact that being and reality are dependent on consciousness. But it's wrong because it clings to this, to the subject or consciousness as being undetermined in its being, as being a worldless subject, as something that is not connected to that, to the being and to the reality that it's aware of, that it's perceiving. So there's kind of a sense in which both realism and idealism are correct, but they're both incorrect in the way that they go about their respective claims. Heidegger then traces out reality's lineage, if you like, back to care in the following way. So reality refers to the being of inner-worldly beings objectively present. And to understand this mode of being, we need to understand inner-worldliness, which we looked at. And inner-worldliness is based on the phenomenon of world. World belongs to the fundamental constitution of Dasein as being in the world. Being in the world is ontologically connected to the structural totality of Dasein we called care. And in that way, reality is dependent on care, which is Dasein. So, of course, all of this doesn't mean that without Dasein there are no objectively present beings. But there's a difference between objectively present beings and reality. And I think that's probably the main take-home point from this section. Reality has been confounded with the problem of the external world. Objectively present things in the external world, matter is not reality. Reality is reality or world is what arises when you have those two components together, Dasein and matter. Then you get a world. Then you get reality. Without one of those, there is neither reality or world. And Heidegger says, just to finish up this section, what it means, what his whole thesis here means, is that only as long as Dasein is there being. If Dasein does not exist, then inner-worldly beings too can neither be discovered nor can they lie in concealment. Then it can neither be said that beings are nor that they are not. Magic. And that's Heidegger on reality. And let me push through. We'll just go straight to the end with truth as well. So, truth. Well, the essence of truth has traditionally been taken to be the agreement of a judgment with its object. And the locus of that truth has been in the judgment itself, in the proposition. This situation, however, for Heidegger is ontologically murky. He says, first of all, how is the act of judging related to the content of the judgment? And how is the content related to the actual thing? None of these are clear for Heidegger. And he gives, so he decides to take a real life example and break it down. Look at what's actually happening. So his example is you got someone with their back to the wall, so they can't see the wall, and they make a true statement. The picture on the wall is hanging crookedly. So what's happening in this situation? Well, first, the speaker is related only to the real thing, i.e. the picture. Okay, there is no representation of the picture in their mind. So we're just steering clear again of this whole idea of there being an inner subject and an outer object which we're comparing. None of that makes any sense in light of this whole discussion we've had up to now. So the speaker is directly related to the thing. Second, we need to remember what statement is. What is statement? Statement is a modification of circumspect interpretation. And what was interpretation? Interpretation was nothing more than disclosure, grounded in understanding and attunement. So that's what it is. Interpretation is disclosure. Statement is therefore disclosure as well. Therefore, it tells us nothing more than that this being is the very being that was meant in the statement. There is no comparing this to that and then seeing if they're the same or different. There is none of that. There's nothing to compare. That's kind of where Heidegger's going with this. There is nothing to compare. There aren't two separate things. We can compare to ascertain the truth then. So statement is just a disclosing of something. It doesn't mean it's always right, obviously. It can be wrong, but there's no comparing of anything. Statement is being based on interpretation and attunement and understanding. It's just disclosure. We can disclose something in the wrong way, disclose something that isn't the way it actually is. That's fine, but there's no comparison of anything. There's no agreement between this and that, a judgment and an object. None of that is ontologically makes ontological sense, Heidegger's saying. So statement is it's a being uncovering, which uncovers the being toward which it is directed. That's cool, right? So this uncoveredness is then confirmed or denied when that which is put forward in the assertion, namely the entity itself, the inner worldly being, shows itself as that very same thing, or when it shows itself as something different. And that's it. That's what all that's happening when someone makes a statement about something in the real world. So truth therefore has nothing to do with any kind of agreement between knowing and object. Rather, being true as being uncovering is in turn ontologically possible only on the basis of being in the world. And that is where we are headed here. Truth requires then an entire conceptual framework for a statement to even make sense. So we've got this idea here that truth is when my statement accurately represents, beware of that word though, when my statement accurately describes or accurately discloses the thing, the inner worldly being. So truth as being uncovered or uncoveredness, where the thing referred to in the statement shows itself as that very thing, that's what I just said, right, is actually a secondary truth. Why? Because I remember I said before, truth requires an entire conceptual framework first. And that framework is this primary truth, which is uncovering what Heidegger calls being uncovering itself. It's the opening up of a logical space in which statements can have meaning through interpretation, understanding, attunement, through being in the world. So we have this distinction then. So truth is not just it's not just, in fact it's nothing like what we thought it was. We thought it was the agreement between proposition and an object. It's not that. Truth, but rather there are two kinds or two levels of truth. Truth as uncoveredness, where the thing referred to in the statement shows itself as that very thing. But this is a secondary truth. The primary truth is the uncovering itself, the creation of this space, logical space, in which anything can be said in the first place. It's the whole. It's being in the world. It's attunement, understanding, interpretation, discourse. All of this activity is the primary truth, because without that secondary truth is meaningless. There can't be a secondary truth. There can't be a truth as uncoveredness, where a thing shows itself as being that thing or as being something different. So let me just keep rolling. Uncoveredness, that secondary truth, is grounded in the disclosedness of the world, which is our primary truth. And that disclosedness of the world is the basic character of Dasein. And that basic character of Dasein is constituted by attunement, understanding, and discourse. And that is care. So the disclosedness of Dasein is therefore the most primordial phenomenon of truth. But since Dasein is its disclosedness, right? Dasein is that attunement and understanding and discourse. It's not just things that we do. Those are not just things that we do or experience. They are Dasein. They make up the being of Dasein. Since Dasein is its disclosedness, then Dasein is in the truth. And that's kind of cool, I think. So obviously this doesn't mean that Dasein knows everything or is always right, or clearly that's not what this means. What it means is that truth as being uncovering this primordial truth, this primary truth, belongs to Dasein's existential condition and makes possible that secondary truth as being uncovered, where the statement, where the thing, the inner worldly thing, reveals itself as being the way that the statement characterized it, or as being something different. Okay, hopefully that makes some kind of sense. So there are, so Dasein is in the truth. There are four kind of considerations that Heidegger makes regarding this. The first is disclosedness in general. So that obviously is crucial to this idea, to Heidegger's take on truth. The second is thrownness. Disclosedness, which is to say that disclosedness is essentially factical. It always has this ontic level. Project is the third consideration, and that is Dasein's being in the truth is always an authentic and disclosive being toward its own potentiality of being. So that there's always that element of being toward the future, projecting forward. And the fourth is falling prey. And this is the idea that being in the truth is always an inauthentic, although primordial, mode of disclosedness in which beings are uncovered, but at the same time distorted in the mode of semblance. And I think what Heidegger's getting at with that is that beings are uncovered by Dasein in its ordinary everyday life, but that ordinary everyday life we saw was originally primordially inauthentic. It was entangled with the they in that publicness um, of a world we didn't create, full of rules and norms and customs that we didn't make. So because of that, the way we disclose things is distorted, because it's been distorted through this through our entanglement. It's been distorted in an inauthentic manner. So I guess if you think about something like a painting, the way we uncover or disclose a painting is within a logical space in which art is perhaps a status symbol. It's perhaps something that one buys because that is what sophisticated people do. So any statements that we make concerning that, and any of the truths that we arrive at through that original disclosive project, will always be conditioned by our entanglement in the they. So in that sense, because it essentially falls prey to the world, Dasein is in untruth in accordance with its constitution of being. So Dasein is in the truth, but Dasein is also in untruth. Now this only makes sense, and it's only possible because truth is not agreement between a subject and an object, or a proposition and an object. Rather, it's a fundamental way of being of Dasein. Truth is a fundamental way of being of Dasein, specifically a being uncovering. So that being uncovering can be it can be inauthentic or authentic, or it can disclose things in an authentic way or an inauthentic way. And in doing that, Dasein is in the truth, but also in untruth. Okay. Let me wrap this section up. So the mistake of traditional philosophy concerning truth, according to Heidegger, is that it treated statement as an inner-worldly being and tried to compare one inner-worldly being, the statement, to another inner-worldly being, the objectively present being, the object that we were talking about. And that was where philosophy originally went wrong concerning truth. So statement, remember we said at the beginning that the judgment, the statement was the locus of truth. So Heidegger says that's not the case. Statement is not the locus of truth. Rather, the most primordial truth is the locus of the statement. And that most primordial truth, remember, is the ontological condition of the possibility that statements can be true or false. That's that most primordial truth. And it's in that sense that Dasein can be in the truth or in untruth, because it's grounded in this primordial truth of uncovering, disclosing, through all of those things we talked about: interpretation, discourse, understanding, attunement. So without Dasein, there is no truth. Therefore, truth is relative to Dasein, but not subjective, as in arbitrary. Because truth, being uncovering, brings Dasein before things themselves. There is being, not beings, only insofar. There is being, not beings, only insofar as truth is. And truth is only insofar as and as long as Dasein is. Done. That's truth. So it's really a redefinition, if you like, of truth, but not an arbitrary one, I think. It's based on this idea that that it goes deeper than, Heidegger's looking at the deepest levels of human existence, and in the way that that Dasein is being in the world, that kind of connected totality being in the world. That's the core. That's where Heidegger's starting from. That's what he's launching from, and that we have to consider truth, and we have to consider everything that we're talking about in terms of that being in the world, that central kind of underlying, undergirding notion. And so truth then, it doesn't even make sense as this idea of comparing a statement with objectively present beings. Rather, it's truth is the uncovering of beings in the first place, the way Dasein discloses the world. Okay, I'll stop talking. I'm drifting. Okay, so I'm gonna sign off there. I'm just gonna throw up one final diagram, which I'm not gonna talk about at all, but you can just have a look at it and see if hopefully it's an attempt to summarize the first division 1, the first 6 chapters, and hopefully it just gives kind of an overview of everything we've talked about. And with that, I will see you in the next video, where we'll look at division 2, and we'll look at things like authenticity before we get into temporality, which is challenging. So thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.